amazing 4 speakers from the 4 V4 countries, and we really hope that we'll be able to provide some new insights for you around about the connection of the V4 countries and China. So I would also start with a few housekeeping. We will have, I will pose 5 questions for the speakers in the next 45-50 minutes, to which they will have the opportunity to reply all of them one by one, and then also reflecting on each other's comments. And then afterwards, we will have 25 minutes of Q&A session, where we very much welcome your questions and your involvement, and the speakers will reply those. As for the questions, feel free to post them anytime during the discussion in the chat box, and Chiara will help me to bring them together. And then when the time comes, in the end, we will post them to the speakers. So without further ado, let me just quickly introduce the speakers again, although you know them mostly, and then start off the discussion of tonight. So firstly, we have Ivana Karásková, founder of Choice and MapInfluenCE, and China Research Fellow at the Association for International Affairs in Prague. She's widely published on the topic in several international journals, scientific and also like others, Le Monde, New York Times, and others. So it is a great pleasure to have her here. Welcome, Ivana.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to be here.
From Hungary, we have Viktor Eszterhai, who is currently senior researcher at the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade in Budapest, before which he was assistant professor at Corvinus and also senior researcher at Pagao Geopolitical Research Institute. His focus is on CE-China relations, as well as non-Western IR theories. So a very warm welcome to you as well, Viktor.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Peter. It's great to be here as well.
And from Poland, we have Jakub Jakóbowski, who is senior fellow at the China Program Center for Eastern Studies in Warsaw. He's also widely published on CE-China relations, as well as Eurasian connectivity. So it is a great honor to have you here. Welcome, Jakub.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hello.
And finally, from representing Slovakia, Richard Turcsányi, who is senior researcher at Palacky University Olomouc and program director at the Central European Institute of Asian Studies, Bratislava, and focusing on this really interesting topic of CE-China relations. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, and hi, everyone.
So without further ado, let me pose the first question. Let's start a bit wide to give the foundation for the V4 discussion. We just witnessed recently, a few weeks ago, the online summit of the 17+1 cooperation, and I will ask you to assess how you see this summit. On the one hand, Xi Jinping promised to purchase a 170 billion USD worth of goods from the region in the next 5 years, which is a huge pledge. But on the other, there seemed to be like less enthusiasm from the V4 countries within the format. So I would like to ask you, what do you see? Do you think the format will be revived and the V4 countries can renew their interest in the initiative, or how do you see it evolving? So I would ask first Ivana, then Jakub, Viktor, and Richard.
Thank you, Peter. Well, I actually do not see that the format is going to be revived, so I would like to start as a contrarian here a little bit. I do see for the past couple of years a certain disillusionment regarding expectations of Chinese investment. There definitely were more words than deeds. At least if we, of course, we have to divide the countries, 17 Central and Eastern European countries, into at least half into EU member states and non-EU member states. A little bit different story in the Western Balkans, but if we concentrate only on EU member states, those 12 of them, that there hasn't been anything quite dramatic happening in terms of investment. A lot of bombastic numbers were flying around for a couple of years, but less of the practical materialization of these MOUs. Moreover, apart from the investment, there is also kind of fatigue on the side of Central and Eastern European countries regarding China for the past at least 3 years, starting with the protests in Hong Kong in 2019, then all this revision and revelation of camps in Xinjiang, that then COVID-19 started. So not so much of enthusiasm into anything connected to China, especially with the recent year and a half. Plus, add to that Huawei 5G awareness, security awareness of different security and intelligence services in Central and Eastern Europe, and you would see that the perception of China has been dropping quite dramatically. So what I do see from the past summit is certain assertiveness on the side of Central and Eastern European countries. And that's the first time we actually see that the Baltic states were quite rebellious, I would say, in this respect. And what I think it signifies or signals is that there is more of strategic thinking on Central and Eastern European side, or at least the beginning of the thinking of what it is that we want from 17+1. Is 17+1 the right platform for dealing with China? If it is the right platform for dealing with China, what can we basically yield from this platform? So this is the very first time I do see that. So to sum up, I don't see a revival of the platform. I just see some kind of repackaging or repurposing of the platform, if at least on the side of Central and Eastern European countries, not definitely on the side of China.
Thank you. Great. Jakub?
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I'll add up some context here. I think back in 2012, when China was initiating this dialogue, it was meant to have two main engines here. One being economic cooperation, the other being some kind of thing that's anticipating Xi Jinping's shared community of mankind thing. Generally, China perceiving this whole region stretching from Estonia to Albania as a post-socialist countries that share certain maybe not values but heritage, at least when it comes to relations with China. So it kind of thought of it as a common fundament, which did not turn out to be true. I mean, both of those engines were not working. And everybody discovered that pretty soon. But in terms of economic cooperation, what China offered at the very beginning, but it's still kind of in this old paradigm, is basically all the things that China proposes to the global south, but then aimed at Central Eastern Europe. That is, the 17+1 is basically based on the blueprint of POCAC in Africa, very similar to other regional initiatives there and there. And of course, this did not work out. Maybe it worked out in the Balkans that are outside of the EU, but it did not work out inside of the EU because we are not part of the global south in any sense, be it the identity or our economic structure. And this was kind of reflected, I think, in 2016 when Xi Jinping was in Warsaw. He said something which is very telling. He said, 17+1 is a platform for the South-South cooperation, but with North-South characteristics, which basically means that we are in between two major facets of China's foreign policy, and there's nothing there in between. So this whole format is China basically looking for a new idea on how to run that, and sometimes it throws some BRI connectivity, carrots there, which did not really work out, in the general sense. Sometimes he's throwing some, agricultural purchases that did not really work out. I mean, China is talking about buying food from this region, but it's less than 200. I mean, it's minuscule. So anyways, on behalf of the Central Eastern Europe, we were kind of looking at China for an additional growth engine, which did not work out because what they offered was not fit. And I think the only thing that makes this format alive and why it's not dead is a very symbolic thing that I think the Prime Minister of Estonia said, or Foreign Minister. He said, we'll be ready to ditch off this format as soon as we'll have the 27+1 in place, because we are meant to have 27+1 meeting last September to sign up Kai, but instead we had a French, German, European Commission, China summit which was anything but the 27+1. So it's a broader question relating to how the EU policy on China is made and why this region needs an additional channel of communication with China. Thanks.
Great. These are great insights, Viktor.
I have to agree with previous speakers that the 70+1 cooperation more seems to be like anti-Shah. It's one of the very famous publications was identified it. It is because there are some. First, I agree with Jakub. There is a very deep structural economic reason that this does not work smoothly. We are a semi-periphery. The region is a semi-periphery, highly dependent on the core countries in Europe. And due to this structural reason, it's really hard to attract Chinese FDI to the region because what we can offer is cheap labor force. And this makes us globally competitive. But cheap labor force has also China at home. So I would not say that this is such an attractive investment target, makes us attractive investment target. The other reason was also going back to the structural reasons that we are part of the European value chains. Therefore, our export is nearly impossible to increase directly to China, but first we have to export it to the Western core countries, and via re-export this can reach to the region. But the national companies, the region we have, are simply not competitive on the Chinese market. So this was the most important economic reason that we were not able to fill this framework with content. And the other, I have to again agree with the previous speaker, it was the European Union. So nearly all sphere of the possible communication with China was filled with regulations from the European Union. And China wanted to provide this framework as an additional institutional mechanism for beside the bilateral dialogues. But due to the European Union, everything was so much regulated. So it was impossible to find anything beside the European Union to communicate with each other. So therefore, I would say that what we have is a kind of an empty framework, what we were not able to fill with content. But it does not necessarily mean that we have to demolish or give up this framework. Because one of the major interests of the region was that this provided a chance to regularly meet with the top Chinese decision makers, and this increased the visibility of the small Central Eastern European countries, of the V4 countries. So I do not agree with this that necessarily we should give this up. But my suggestion is that maybe we can keep this institutionalized framework, but we have to be very realistic about the potential possible development path of this framework. So I have to agree with the previous speakers that I do not expect the 70+1 format being revived in the coming years.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, I'm in line also with my three colleagues. So maybe let me just add a kind of somewhat different perspective looking at these things. The 16+1, when it was established, it was definitely about economy from the perspective of the Central Eastern European countries. And essentially already a few years into the platform, most countries started, learning that they are not going to benefit economically. But then they still decided to participate in the show because for the leaders, of Montenegro or Estonia or Slovakia, it is still useful to have a photo opportunity, right, with the Chinese Prime Minister, because they could kind of use it as a way to attract international attention, international media. Some countries tried to use this as a maybe stick, in their Brussels dealing and, maybe with Washington dealing and so on and so on. But now, even this show started to come by the CE countries, because I think Ivana mentioned the tensions between China and the West, the US, the EU, and so on. And more CE countries realize that they don't even want to participate in this show So that's why we've seen this year that the most leaders actually decided to skip it, right? Even if it was online. So it's very difficult to come up with a good explanation why you're not going to meet a Chinese president who's one of the most powerful persons. So it's really a statement, which cannot be excused by, a busy schedule or something like that. And let me just give you one example how, the word futile comes to my mind, how futile the platform sometimes is in terms of, the economic promises. So, in terms of Slovakia, few days before summit, there were rumors, some announcements that the prime minister wouldn't participate. And then 1 or 2 days before, it was announced that Slovakia signed agreement about the sheep meat exports to China. Now Slovakia has no sheep meat exporter great power. Philip Šebok checked the statistics, and Slovakia exported 3.5 million euros of sheep meat, and 3 million of that went to Italy. And Slovak economy is not going to change because of these agreements. So of course, politicians want to do something, diplomats want to show they are kind of helping economy and so on. But from our perspective, as observant, this is really not going to change anything in terms of economic structure and so on. So, I really read these promises to purchase agriculture product as actually sometimes fundamentally misunderstanding of the whole economic structure of the region, because these countries simply they are not agriculture focused countries.
Right. So then, if I see it correctly, like the main reasons of lacking of cooperation is that that there's no match of economic structure or. Yeah, so I would actually ask maybe Jakub, you mentioned this, to elaborate on this a bit more. So what is the main reason why the 17+1 just ended up being this shallow framework or like shallow shell without any economic substance?
Yeah, the empty shell term copyright belongs to Ivana, but generally speaking, well, one additional remark. That often it's easy to overlook the actual significance of the structure, the 17+1, because what we focus on are these once a year prime ministers meetings that happen or do not happen, but the actual content stems from that's only the tip of the iceberg, because then you'll have about 200 events, meetings, coordination, structural events of whatsoever within the format that is like an agriculture ministers meeting, or small medium enterprises support organization meeting, or China Central Eastern Europe traditional dance festival. You'll have all kinds of those meetings happening, often below the radar of China watching community, which I think is giving the actual content into the cooperation. Once again, it's very similar to what's happening in other regions. Like China goes like the Chinese are calling it the comprehensive cooperation, yeah. So 整体外交. So it's like there's a lot of it in it. But then, of course, I mean, China's got some inroads into the societies by that means. But in terms of economics, I see Richard trying to jump into just like to build upon what Viktor said. I mean, if you look at China's and Central European positions in the global value chains, we are competitors. We compete for an access to the Western and German, Dutch, American, Japanese value chains. And in a way, we are competing. That's why we're not trading. And if we are trading, most of our trade goes through the value chains of global corporation. I mean, look at Slovakia's exports. It's mostly finished cars, and Slovakia doesn't have its own car brand. That's all German. When it comes to the Polish imports, like a large chunk of it are just parts, from Dell production facilities in Chengdu, reaching Łódź, and then being assembled and shipped elsewhere. So the question is, do we really have, like as Central Europeans and China, do we really have any influence on our economic cooperation? Because often even outside of our, political potential. Yeah, and that's why everything's so focused on the agriculture sphere. But it's, at least in Poland, we do have some serious experts there, not to China, but elsewhere. But also it kind of reflects our China's vision of this cooperation. They don't want us to be a production hub aimed at their market. They want us to be a resource, like agriculture countries that ship food to China. That's the end goal here. Leaving the floor to Richard, I guess.
If I can just jump in, I totally agree with Jakub that summits attract the most attention, but there is a lot of other exchanges and so on. But what I would maybe somehow divert is that I think even those side events really have no content. Like, of course, there is something going on. There is actually a lot of going on, but I think most of it is just meetings, exchanges for the sake of meeting and exchanges. And, I started calling the China, the 17+1 cooperation with the, in the apostrophes, because this is no real cooperation. I mean, I actually took part in one, in Slovakia, it was about, what was it, technology transfer conference. And, I tried to find out what is going on within this, supposedly ministerial meetings, but, very few ministers participate in those. And, they don't really make any consequential decisions, because what kind of consequential decisions they can make, right? I mean, we are part of the EU, so we are not deciding on the trade policy. We are not deciding on investment policy. So as Jakub said, and I agree with this, actually the promotion of own agriculture product is really like the only thing which is left, but this is just so marginal. So I actually subscribe to the thing that this is really an empty shell, and actually that's not, Ivana would have a little different opinion, I think, but that's not because I overlook those sectorial somehow exchanges, but actually I don't see much content within those either. So, yeah.
I feel compelled to actually react because I was mentioned a couple of times here. So the thing is that what's going on really under the 17+1 umbrella is really interesting. As Jakub said, it's just a tip of an iceberg, because we focus on FDI, which is coming, or rather probably not coming to our region, and we are focusing on annual summits. But there are so many other things. Some are really bizarre and some really lack content. Like, I do not see any trouble with dance camps for Hungarian children at all within the 17+1, or for elderly in Hungary. That's quite nice. Let's have them dance. Dancing is quite healthy, right? But there are so many other things, like cooperation between political parties. I mean, political parties from Central and Eastern Europe and Chinese Communist Party, which is absolutely non-transparent. Cooperation in academia, cooperation between different media sphere, and so on. And it's not just cooperation on paper. This is the cooperation which is really happening, and for which China allocated incredible number of amount of funding. So there are tangible results coming out from this cooperation, and it would be great if more attention is paid to these events, paid to these forms of cooperation. Also, the outcomes of the cooperation is known to public. And then it would be, of course, much easier to decide on this crucial issue whether 17+1 is an empty shell or not, which I would like to be corrected. Perhaps it's an empty shell. Let's see. Regarding the original question, which was what is the problem with main reason why there are no tangible economic results of the cooperation? Well, I absolutely agree with Jakub that one portion of that response is the global supply chains. The other one is that when we are talking specifically about V4, there is not so many things left which were not already bought by multinational companies or by other big players. So when we are talking about Czech Republic, Skoda Auto already belonging to Volkswagen Group, steel production already belonging to Indians. And you can go sector by sector, and all the big interesting companies were already sold. So what is left perhaps is not that interesting. And the second part is that there are no high quality projects prepared in advance to be, let's say, sell to the Chinese side. And it's coming from the beginning that the analysis which was done on our side and on Chinese side are absolutely not matching. So we do not know what we want to sell to China, and Chinese do not know what they want to buy here. So there's a lot of mismatch and lots of expectations which which are bound to fail.
I think these mismatches and these different steps to try to cooperate with each other are necessarily not so effective, because these two regions are so far from each other. Of course, there is this historical, I would say, a fairy tale that we used to have a socialist background and so on, but this not really count anymore. So I think this is obvious that we in so many cases we don't know how to cooperate with each other, and we don't know at all what should we do. This is not just China. This is also our fault as well. And from our point of view, partially agree with the previous speakers, but I always have to reflect on the fact that we are not innovative. So China bring this institutionalized mechanism to the region, and we were not really enough creative to try to use it for our own interest. So in most of the cases, and this is, for example, a very important issue in Hungary, we are simply not able to define what is our national interest regarding China. So we always expect something, big favor coming from China, and then we have to do some favor to China, and maybe this will come back once. But we are not able to define what we want. And there is a framework what we should use. Maybe Ivana mentioned at the beginning that probably there is a sign that some countries started to cooperate with each other in this issue, but we never tried to use this platform in order to support our own interest. So I think that's also a very important part of the picture, that it's not just simply China, that China is misbehaving and doing mistakes, but simply we are not enough creative, or maybe we just lack of creativity how to use this platform. So this is also part. Probably the question of economy, I could just repeat myself. So these are most of the reasons. It goes back to structural issues, that we are semi-periphery with cheap labor force, which can be really globally competitive. And yes, secondly, I agree with Ivana that nothing left. All the valuable parts of our economy are already bought by multinational investors. So the biggest investment story in this region belongs to Wanhua Group, which bought a Hungarian chemical plant. But originally, this was previously bought by a multinational company, and this was not directly bought in Hungary, but this went through different channels, probably from Luxembourg. So there is not too much to offer, and that's a reality we have to accept. Should not run for dreams, because it's not a problem that's a reality, but we have to understand this, and beside this, then we can be creative and maybe find a kind of an ideal how to have a benefit from this relationship.
Thank you so much for the reflections as well. So we see that economic cooperation is sometimes lacking, but there are also some other ways which are beneficial from the countries. So then my next question would be like, how does this alter? How have this altered in the last 1 year? Like, we are nearing the 1 year of lockdowns here in Central Europe as well, and China is launching or has launched so-called mask and vaccine diplomacy, trying to build relations through these means. So how do you see? Did China's influence? So how will this affect the relationships? And how does your country view the efforts of China in this sense? And was there any difference in the country's reception, given if there is influence on the country's media scene by China or not? So yeah, let me reframe the question. So how does your country view, what is your view of China, the success of China's diplomacy of vaccines and masks? And if there is an addition to this, given that that there might be some influence from Chinese side on local media outlets. And I will first ask Jakub, and then Viktor, Richard, and Ivana.
Yeah, thanks. Like, first of all, I think the general fallout of COVID in terms of China's policy is that I strongly believe that it kind of the COVID that was a facilitator of more general processes. China's foreign policy has basically set off this whole, World War diplomacy, crushing Hong Kong, China being much more aggressive. And this also applies to some Central Eastern European countries. We've seen World Warrior diplomacy going on here. I think this thing is generally supported by COVID indirectly, but let's leave it aside. I think it's most visible in Czech Republic, I guess. Vystrčil's visit and so on. I'd leave it to Ivana. But anyways, in terms of the COVID diplomacy, that is mask diplomacy and vaccine diplomacy, well, generally, speaking about Poland, I would say that China's doing a lot in terms of PR campaigns in the media, but I would say that the general consensus is that it's not very effective. It's, we'll have an op-ed of Xi Jinping visiting number of factories inside China, saying that 40 years of reforms brought a lot of them. And then the Poles look at it and they just see socialist propaganda from 1980s, and they just don't buy it. So okay, if any Chinese listen to that, you should do better than that. But anyways, when it comes to these concrete things related to COVID and vaccines and masks, we had some purchases of masks at the very early, I think, spring last year. But it was facilitated by the Chinese, as it happened to be the case for everyone. You had to call Wang Yi in order to buy stuff in these crucial months. But I wouldn't say it was a foundation for anything bigger than that. Of course, everybody's referring to that in official communications, but I wouldn't say it was a big win because we managed to buy the stuff from other sources pretty soon. And when it comes to vaccines, I know that there are things going on in Hungary now. I mean, the vaccinations have started or are about to start. But living to Viktor, I think Slovakia is also talking about that. As for now, we have, Poland is doing pretty good in terms of vaccinations. So and the tempo is great. I mean, we're third in Europe, I guess. So I haven't seen any talk, about additional non-EU sourcing of vaccines yet. But hopefully we'll manage to do the whole thing using the EU channels. Thanks.
Yeah, it was a political issue. But it was everywhere in other parts of the world and in most of the countries. So what China did was not so special. Hungary also had this. We used to export some medical equipment, even stuff, especially to the V4 countries, in order to support our diplomatic efforts. So I don't see this so dangerous as the mainstream view on this issue, but Hungary was a very special case compared to other countries in the region, especially compared to other EU member countries in the region. That not the Chinese narrative was interesting in this case, but I think the Hungarian narrative was even more interesting because the Hungarian government tried to portray the situation that China is coming to Hungary to help us because this verified the Eastern opening foreign policy concept of the Hungarian government, which was introduced in 2011, that we have to diversify our relationship and especially we have to focus on China. So this was portrayed as China is coming here to help us to give back this favor. And this was just mostly a narrative because in the reality, majority of the medical equipment were bought on the market. This was a very interesting situation that in Hungary, it was not the Chinese government who wanted to influence and to create a narrative in order to compete with other narratives as well. But it was mostly the Hungarian government who tried to define the situation according to its own interest. And this is also true for the media. So there are some small signs that the Chinese media is becoming more active in Hungary. I'm also invited to some of these kind of talks, but in reality, this narrative was not effective at all. Similar to, as Jakub mentions, it was not effective in Hungary. What was effective, the Hungarian government's narrative regarding this issue.
Yeah, if I can just stress what just Viktor said, this is the same thing in Slovakia, and I would say in the Czech Republic, very similar. So in Slovakia, we actually saw a change of the government right, after a few weeks of the, COVID started spreading. And interestingly, the old government, the prime minister and few ministers, welcomed the first Chinese supplies, not aid, but supplies of medical equipment at the airport. And, I think this defined for many people the image that China is helping us. But it's exactly what Viktor said. This was not the Chinese channels. This was the local politicians who decided to, and of course they did it because they wanted to prove themselves in front of the eyes of the public that they can provide. In the Czech Republic, it gets even kind of different angle because of the divisions, and some Czech politicians then wanted to prove that, their kind of good links to China finally paid back, right? So that's so I would say that it's very often we talk about the influence of China and so on, and of course it's an important issue, but I think we should keep in the center that the local politicians and local channels are much more, and local elites, so to say, are probably much more effective in spreading the images of China than actually China itself.
If I may, just a very quick remark on what Richard said. I think this applies to many other spheres of cooperation, or most of them. But the dominant narrative on what's happening in this region is that China is coming in, buying us out, and then pulling the strings. Whereas in fact, if you see any intensified cooperation in any country whatsoever, it's a direct result of a choice of local elites to invite China to certain sectors, to strike political deals with China for their parochial interest. That's my view of what's happened in Hungary in the first place, in Czech Republic to a large extent, when you had local elites inviting China on their own terms, China that is often ham-handed and clumsy and doesn't know the region, and then offering China some assets to buy, opening doors for China and drawing their own benefits. So it's politics first and economics second in terms of basically everything.
Yeah, I might add to that China didn't create security loopholes in our own societies. It's just using them. And this is the same story with Russia. And we know that, and we have known that for years, but we didn't do anything because sometimes the loopholes are good for the local politicians because they use them as well. And that's the case of influence over media. And you can go basically sector by sector, and you will see that there is definitely an interest on some local oligarch or political elite or economic elite or business or lobbyist not to close those security loopholes. But back to the vaccines. There are some similarities with mask diplomacy and some dissimilarities. So China basically is once again trying to portray itself as a part of the solution, not the real cause or the source of the problem. But unlike during the mask diplomacy, where China was sitting on this big pile of material everybody wanted and needed, with vaccine diplomacy, there is numerous other suppliers. So you can choose. In China, from the very beginning, started to target the semi-peripheries, developing countries, and so on. Unlike Russia, which basically is also competing in other areas where the Western vaccines are also competing. Current debates about Chinese vaccines are very closely linked to the question of approval of European Medicines Agency. So it's very difficult in our countries, and I exclude here Hungary, which is a different case, very difficult in our countries to sell to the public that you are going to vaccinate, inoculate population with something which was not approved by EMA, by the European Medicines Agency. But on the other hand, there are also pressures. In Czech Republic, we will have general election in October 2021. So this year, Prime Minister's Babiš's preferences are dropping down because of the mismanagement of the crisis. So he might be tempted to look for other than Western vaccines. So that's why he went to Hungary. That's why he went to Serbia to learn these examples and how to learn how to deal with this and how to eventually bypass EMA if there is this need. We did recently, I think it was last week actually, living in a different time zone. Everything happens so fast now. So probably last week, we published a new paper in Czech exactly on this issue of how possible or how probable it would be that Czechia will have Chinese vaccines. And we mapped media discourse since July last year. And what we found out is that the whole debate about vaccines is actually driven by the debate about Sputnik 5. So if Czechia is going to have unapproved vaccine, unapproved from EMA, it's probably going to be the Russian vaccine, not the Chinese one. And the Chinese is basically piggybacking on the debate on the Russian vaccine. So if, on the other hand, if Sputnik 5 is allowed in Czechia, then it will create more space for the Chinese vaccines to be to have the bigger space here as well. And very last remark, Chinese vaccines were offered during the 17+1 summit. I was expecting them to be offered in a big charade, because everybody wants to inoculate. Everybody is unhappy with the progress in European Union, how ineffective or slow the vaccination process is. So the question here is why they were offered in a not a big scale. One of the reasons could be that Chinese side wouldn't like to go through EMA, because otherwise they will have to give full documents. They will have to allow inspection of facilities in China and so on. So that might be one of the reasons. And the other one is that perhaps they don't have the capacity. If you look at the pace for which People's Republic of China is inoculating its own population, which is of course massive, still they are very slow. So that means that if they would like to prioritize their own population, they can't really deliver in such a big numbers as they promised different countries that they will deliver. I will stop here.
Can I reflect on this a bit? Because Ivana mentioned that China used a kind of a centralized statecraft to influence politics, at least with the medical equipment. And I've never seen this proved. Because I agree with this, that China had the biggest amounts of medical equipment, but this would provide a lot of opportunity for China to really stop the export of these products and to influence other countries' behavior. And China did not do it. So I don't see why China is so bad in this situation. So I really don't see how was it proven that my if maybe I'm wrong, but please correct me. But what I could see that China was not enough centralized in this issue. All the countries were in the Chinese market competing with each other, but there was no centralized real in China to say that, okay, we have to introduce quality standards on medical equipment. We do not let all the socks maker to start to produce masks and so on. So what I could see from Hungary at least, that the Chinese statecraft was not so strong. We want to portray the Chinese statecraft so massive and so effective, but what I could see at least, that there was an enormous opportunity to do this, but China did not do it. And I don't think because they were injured or something, but I think they were simply not enough effective. So maybe I don't really know the details of the vaccine issues. It's below my level. Sorry, it's over my level. I don't really, but I don't see the Chinese statecraft so effective in these cases. So therefore, I have high doubts that if China is not really effective in this, how can China use this to influence politics so much? I have doubts about it, and maybe others will have a different opinion on this.
Okay, yeah. So then thank you for these comments. So it seems that that success is not that massive, and if it is, then it's mostly due to the local elites' decisions. So I would go a bit back to cooperation and not 17+1, but Richard, you mentioned in one of your papers that there could be a V4 plus China arrangement, and I was wondering what is your opinion on this? So could the V4 plus China, could the V4 strengthen their cooperation and step up to this challenge and step in somewhere between the bilateral relations with China and the EU level and establish a separate forum to acquire more economic benefits, for example? Or how do you see this? Yeah, first Richard and then Ivana, Jakub, and Viktor.
I think that must have been very old paper of mine. First of all, I think maybe about 5 years ago, many of us were suggesting that at that time 16+1 is a really weird animal because it's mixing, I mean, we've already mentioned it, that it's mixing EU members and non-EU members. And the reality of, you know, the Western Balkans is really very different. And very often the 16+1, 17+1 came and suggested things which might have been, you know, useful for the non-EU members, but were not useful for the EU members. So I think, you know, maybe 5 years ago, some of us pointed out that the V4 plus China might have been much more natural platform, you know, to exchange or to meet China, because in this case, we would really talk kind of, you know, more or less similar countries. But I think with the time going, it's becoming less and less realistic for various reasons. One reason would be that, you know, as you also noticed here, Hungary, you know, Hungarian official approach to China is just very different. And even if you are following European affairs, you can clearly see somehow division between, on the one side, Poland and Hungary, then the Czech Republic and Slovakia, right? Maybe Budapest and Warsaw is much more willing to kind of stand against Brussels, but, you know, Slovakia, Czech Republic, much less so. You know, Slovakia, Czech Republic doesn't see itself as, you know, opposing Brussels, opposing the EU. You know, I think, you know, the official approaches are much more, you know, in line with that. So in fact, the whole V4, you know, platform doesn't really move on very effectively. And especially, you know, on things such as China, I think there is very little willingness in Slovakia and probably in the Czech Republic to cooperate with Hungary. I think right now in Poland as well, right? Poland, which is kind of one of the closest American partner in Europe, of course, now with the US-China relations in the way as they are. So I really don't see much potential for any V4 China cooperation, and that suggestion should be seen in light of, you know, just as a possible, you know, remedy to really, you know, ineffective 16-17+1.
Yeah, I will be very brief on that. I do not see this realistic at all as well. Where I do think coalitions could be made on similar views of different political parties in different countries over China. So I do see, for example, potential coalition of Pirate Party here in Czech Republic with the current ruling party in Slovakia, also current ruling party in Lithuania, and so on. Plus, I do see functional cooperation or functional coalitions on various issues. If, for example, infrastructure projects are debated, which is not currently the case, but if there is some kind of bigger infrastructure project which will encompass a couple of countries, then I do see also a functioning coalition emerging out of this. But apart from that, the biggest coalition potential probably is, I'm sorry, again, picking against Viktor and Budapest, the biggest coalition partners, I do see 11 European member states, 12 out of 17, with the exception of Hungary, finding some kind of common speech, common position within the EU.
I need to agree with the other speakers. I mean, the potential for the V4 to be the venue for meeting China is not that big. I mean, first of all, there are the V4 plus Japan and V4 plus Korea formats, but I would say the biggest strength of this V4 format is influencing the EU internally, and this is and will be the fundament of it, and not necessarily external relations, which basically happen to be like the V4 happens to be divided. I mean, there's the issue of Brussels that was mentioned, that may stay or pass, but then there's the issue of the US-China competition, where we have a very stark difference between Hungary, which is welcoming China into EU and this region, and Poland, which is like openly supportive towards the US. So I wouldn't say it's like looking at the V4 internally, it's not the best idea. But then there's an issue of whether we should like talk in smaller groups of China or in larger groups. I mean, one of the main takeaways from the 17+1 is that even the 12 EU countries or 17 countries in general, it's not enough to actually push China to do something we want, because basically what the 17+1 is the region constantly knocking at China's doors to open up the markets and open up some business opportunities. Now, even this 17+1 meeting, at least in the Polish president's remarks, were mostly about there are structural problems to solve and we want to solve them. So anyways, I think it's that the best idea is not to go into a narrower groups, but in the larger groups, once again referring to the 27+1 idea that was floated by Angela Merkel and did not work out. I mean, and the question is why? And instead of that, once again, I'd like to stress that instead of 27+1, we get 2+1 plus the Euro Commission. And is that the way for the EU to decide on China? Because if it is, I think we are coming back to 2012 and why in the first place the region decided to talk with China is that I think one of the it's paradoxical because the Chinese often referred and still refer to 17+1 as a platform that we need to get to know each other. And I think the biggest result of this practice is indeed we got to know China and we discovered our interest. I mean, 10 years ago, we didn't know nothing about what to do with China, what are the problems, what are the opportunities. Now we know that. And I think the main takeaway is that, China needs to change for this whole thing to work. I mean, at least their market access, but also, their economic offer, the use of the trade interdependencies. And the only way to do that is with the EU as a whole. So the main point is that I think the region now is certainly aware of its interests. I mean, Viktor was saying that maybe we are not having as coherent national interest debates and strategies, but on many sectoral levels, we have very concrete ideas on what to do with China. So I think the best way is just to organize the EU policy on China in a way that will accommodate those interests. And you see this being told by many Central Europeans, just once again referring to Estonia, which is super critical towards China, saying we're ready to ditch it as long as we have a place at the EU-China table. So the V4 is certainly not a way to achieve that. Thanks.
Okay, if I can have a funny comment on this, the biggest result of the 70+1 cooperation is that we scholars know each other very well now. So we communicate, if not daily basis, but week by week or month by month. So that's one of the results that nobody expected to have. But to be more serious, I used to agree with Jakub that we have to extend, not cut into pieces the 17+1 cooperation and include the European Union. This is a very good idea from a functional point of view, and I agree. And we need a kind of loosely institutionalized mechanism in order to communicate with each other, because in this increasingly multipolar international order, this kind of loosely institutionalized channel can decrease problems in the communication. It helps to facilitate some cooperation in certain sectors, not in everything. So I don't believe that we need an alliance with China. I never say this, but we need some loosely institutionalized analysis. But from the Central Eastern European countries' point of view, this issue is a bit sensitive, because if you extend it to the EU level, we will lose this special position. So if I would be asked to give an advice to the Hungarian government, I would never agree to extend it to the European Union level, because this would certainly decrease the importance of Hungary, for example, in importance of other individual countries. Because, as I mentioned at the beginning, that was the original interest of the region, that increased the visibility of these small countries in order to try to attract more economic cooperation to the region from China. So the visibility is a very important issue in this. Yeah, and no chance that V4 would be a successful form of dealing with China, because of course there are two sides. One is the V4, the others already argued that we are more divided in most of the foreign policy questions. The other is China itself. And this was in the air in the last few years, that maybe V4 could be a better format, but China was never really interested in this issue. So there were some discussions, even on the V4 level, but this would mean to China that we have to give up the format which we put on the table. So that means a kind of loss of faith for China. And China is a great power. They try to avoid these kind of situations, or at least as I see.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So as a final question before we turn to the Q&A, I would ask you to reflect on this question in 1 minute, each of you. How do you see the future trajectory for the next few years of your country? Do you think it will change its course, or, for example, Hungary would stay towards China and the others more on an anti-China or like diverging path? And yeah, please be concise, and then we will open the question for the floor for the questions. Please, Viktor, start.
I think Hungary is the easiest case. So the major reason of this, we call it multi-vector foreign policy, is that the government recognized that we are facing an increasingly multipolar international system, and this has not changed. Even COVID strengthened this kind of tendencies, that China and other emerging ports are going to be more important in the future. So therefore, for Hungary, that's a kind of an opportunity to diversify its dependency from the Western core countries. So I don't see that the Hungarian elite is ready to join. Of course, there are other factors. These are the external actors. Many things depend on, for example, the American administration, the new American administration, and we still don't really see what's going to be the China strategy of the new administration. So we have to wait a bit and see. But at least from the Hungarian side, I don't see any sign that the Hungarian elite or the political elite would like to change the direction.
Thank you, Jakub.
Well, I think what we've witnessed in the Polish-Chinese relations in the last 2 to 3 years, those were very turbulent times. But important takeaway from that is that we've maintained, healthy communication channels with China. There's both bilaterally and in terms of the 17+1. Although we have, first of all, reevaluated the approach to China's engagement in critical infrastructure, including the cyberspace. And I think if you look at which countries did so, this is a belt of countries stretching from Finland to Sweden, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, and Romania. And those are all countries that have a negative attitude towards, I mean, they feel threatened by Russia, because indeed they are. And this is a key thing that I guess might and will affect the relations here, as we see the China-Russia relationship tightening and developing very fast. And I think China needs to consider that as a factor when it comes to its relations with the region here. And this is, I think, a potential, a large obstacle for anything for going forward. And apart from that, we're kind of like repeating the same demands to China when it comes to market access, reducing the trade deficit, engaging China with productive greenfield investments, and so on. But we've been doing this for years now, and China is reluctant to change anything. So I think we're going to stay at this like low intensity dialogue. Thanks.
Thank you. Ivana?
Well, there are so many factors actually to consider when it comes to Czechia, because it partially depends on the US administration, whether the position on China will change, which seems that it will probably not change, but also depends on the mood in the European Union, especially after the elections in Germany. And crucially, it also depends on the outcome of general elections in Czechia in 2021. And there are so many things which can happen in 7 months time. 7 months, it's really a long time in politics. So it's absolutely impossible to predict what kind of coalition will come up out of these elections. So it can change quite dramatically. It can stay as it is, well, difficult really to predict. And also, it depends a little bit on China as well, whether it will learn from the 17+1 summit fiasco, or whether it will basically treat the countries as it tried to treat them during the January, which ended up with countries discussing what it is that 17+1 actually is doing, and whether it would not be better to leave the format altogether. And one more even more speculative question, looking for a long-term impacts of COVID-19 crisis and how the EU is going to react on that. If we do have a recession, if we do have something similar to global financial crisis, when China reacted quite in a quite good manner, I would say, it may win China favor once again in the region, especially if the EU is lacking this on solidarity. And if China offers investment, and this time real investment, I think that the V4 countries may very easily fall for that as well. But this is a really very, very hypothetical, very speculative question.
Thank you. Richard?
So Slovakia is a little of an outlier in the V4 region, because I think all 3 other countries have actually quite different approach to China compared to the rest of the EU. So Hungary is kind of more positive. Poland is actually kind of closer to Washington, you would say. And Czech Republic is interesting because it switches between, depending who's in power, either like very critical, actually more critical than most the rest of the EU, or kind of more positive than the rest of the EU. And now if you put these other V4 countries, actually Slovakia is really kind of an average. It probably it wants to stick to the majority of the EU approach. And that's why, issues such as, 5G and, investment deal and others, I really expect that Slovakia wouldn't be kind of very loud, and at the end would just go with the majority. And I expect that would continue. It has continued before, no matter who was in power. Of course, we did see some, for instance, president meeting the Dalai Lama, acceptance of Uyghurs from Guantanamo. But I see those as exceptions, not changing the overall rule, which is really sticking to with the majority of the EU.
Thank you. Perfect. So thank you all for the replies and the amazing comments, for the questions. And then now I open the floor for the audience's questions. And the first question is already in, And I will read it aloud, and then please reply any of whom you want to reply. So, Munich conference revealed major differences between how Germany, France want to approach China and how the US would like Europe to approach China. This was also showed by the conclusion of the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. What impact will this have on the V4 countries as they seek to balance their ties with the new Biden team and with their big EU trade partners? Whoever wants to take the question can go ahead.
Okay, I may kick off the discussion on this. Well, yeah, but that's a good observation. Basically, all V4 countries or all Central Eastern European countries, EU members, are in a similar dilemma because we are part of the German supply chains, and we like to, I wouldn't like to say bandwagon, let's say align with Berlin on a number of issues. So there is this tendency and trend towards looking for what the EU/Germany, because in our terms it is usually Germany, what it is that they want and how they are driving the relationship with China. On the other hand, Germany is not a security provider, and we, with our historical experience, we need security guarantees, and we are not looking to EU to provide them. We are looking to US to provide them. So, and the US doesn't want to be nice to China, right? So we are constantly within these two balancing act, and it's a security economic dilemma we are in. And we will have to somehow balance that. And we have seen this with Thai as well, that on one hand, number of countries in Central and Eastern Europe signal that they don't feel comfortable with how the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment was negotiated. On the other hand, the question here is how much genuine the critique really was, because the prevailing narrative in Central and Eastern Europe, or at least in Czechia, was that whatever benefits German car manufacturers is essentially benefiting us as well, so we should keep quiet. So there is this tendency, and if the EU is drifting apart from the US and going through the strategic autonomy path, I do fear that there is going to be a lot of tensions and a lot of dilemma in Central and Eastern Europe regarding this.
Yeah, if I may, just building on what Ivana said, I mean, at least Angela Merkel was kind of pivotal, because Macron didn't even mention China once, and he always was talking about was Middle East and Africa, and strategic autonomy away from the US. So at least this dilemma is not between France and like Paris and Washington. It's Berlin and Washington, which I hope, like, as the Biden administration agenda unfolds and as we are waiting for Bundestag elections, we might strike a sweet spot of a closer Berlin-US cooperation, hopefully. But anyways, I think that the dilemmas that Ivana has presented are genuine here, and they're going to stay. I think a big question about Biden's administration is whether they will continue the Trump's approach to this region, where, and especially in the last years of his presidency, we saw initiatives like the Three Cities Initiative being presented as an alternative to China's offerings to the region, and I direct the alternatives like it's either 3 Cs or 7+1. What the American diplomats were saying to Balkan countries were not part of it, but anyways, the message was just like that. But and I think you may think of Central Eastern Europeans are being greedy and petty and and picky in terms of switching their political alignment according to how the money flows in. But I think that's a thing that is going to be there for a long time. I mean, we are an underdeveloped region, especially when it comes to infrastructure and connectivity, and we will. And I would say, depending on the political constellations and the elections in the region, you will have political parties and that will look at China as a connectivity provider, as an economic provider. So that's a gap that the US also needs to fill. And if Biden decides not to pursue and not to continue that, for now, there's a strong congressional consensus in the U.S. on the 3 Cities initiative, but it's just the very beginning. I mean, what the pledges that the U.S. made are small, even compared to what China offered here, and of course, very, very, very small in terms of what the EU does here in the region. But anyways, it all depends on Biden's determination to actually be there in the region and be not only a security provider, but also an economic kind of cooperation provider, not necessarily giving away money, but coming up with feasible business arrangements that provide genuine development opportunities to the region, because apparently China did not manage to do so, and maybe the US will. That's the main question. Thanks.
Maybe I just, if I can add one thing which builds on what Ivana said, but I think wasn't mentioned in this talk very much, and that is, CE countries internally are very divided as well. So, there is, of course, the picture which was described that, looking to Western Europe for economy, looking to the DC for security. But actually, so I've run a public opinion survey in 13 European countries, including 7 CE countries. And one of the findings which is relevant here is that when it comes to China, CE countries are internally much more divided than the Western European countries. And I think it has a lot to do with identity, because in a country like Czech Republic, Slovakia, but also others, you do have some section of society, actually quite big section of society, who has very positive view of Russia, of the East, and who has very negative view of the EU. And when you consider this reality, actually you would get elite who is pro-Western, pro-Washington often, for instance, in Slovakia, right? That would be mostly kind of pro-Western elite, but actually a large section of public would be very skeptical of the West. So I think this is one thing, that the CE countries are not necessarily kind of more positive towards China, but what really makes them different is they are more divided on China, and their approach can shift a lot, such as what was mentioned. The Czech Republic here is the best example of this really shifting and very divided nature of attitudes towards China.
Mostly agree with the previous speakers, but the perception from Budapest is probably interesting in this case, that at least the political elite saw the investment agreement is a clear sign that most of the EU countries do not really want to buy this Cold War rhetoric and Cold War strategy, that we live in blocks. And this is very important message for Budapest, that probably the world is more complicated. We live in an interconnected codependency due to globalization. And this simple answers that the world is black and white is probably not going to work in the longer term. And this is not just the Hungarian position. Many European countries who do not openly act according to its view, and some other allies of the United States, even in East Asia, have the similar view that this Cold War strategy, Cold War rhetoric does not lead to anywhere. So from this point of view, this kind of agreement, this investment agreement, was a kind of a message to Washington, and for Budapest, this was very pleasant. That this is a strong message, that we don't want this. We don't want to choose a side. We have to be extremely pragmatic. And from this point of view, of course, I already mentioned the limitation of this pragmatic approach towards China, at least from economic point of view, and some other political, cultural, as well as etc. There are a lot. But this is an important issue, at least for the Hungarian political elite, that maybe the judgment of the international circumstances is not so simple, that the Hungary is the only country who is against the 26 other EU member countries. So Ivana portrayed very well the situation, how much we dependent on the German economy. Yep. that's our national. I mean, the Hungary politically define it. That's the national interest of Hungary to together with Germany and to see the world as a multipolar international system.
Thank you very much. So the second question is again to everyone. During the summit, President Xi Jinping proposed cooperation on customs clearance coordination for countries along the China-Europe Land-Sea Express line. Is this feasible given the EU's common trade policy, or do you think that this will end up being aimed at non-EU members of 17+1? How could this work?
I just like to say that it's not a new concept. It's the working group between Macedonia, Serbia, and Hungary was there for at least 5 years, I guess. And I haven't seen this thing working. Maybe Viktor has some knowledge on that. China is doing that basically everywhere now, especially in Africa. They're sending their custom administration officers to different countries to upgrade their technical side of custom clearing and so on. I would assume they would like to kind of provide some soft connectivity infrastructure along the Greece, Macedonia, Serbia, Hungary corridor, but then there's precisely the issue of the EU. I mean, it's all regulated according to the EU common regulations. So maybe like you can meet and you can talk about smoothing this thing up. Of course, there are some issues that the EU does not regulate, but I think that the bulk of the work is still on the EU level, and you're just no way to push it forward. I see Viktor nodding, so I guess he's agreeing with me.
Okay, perfect.
I fully agree with Jakub in this. It's technical
Perfect.
issues related to the.
I will switch to the next question, which is directed to Ivana, and it reads as you mentioned, the cooperation between political parties and the risks of the non-transparent cooperation with China within the format. Is it possible that now China regards 17+1 primarily as a united front kind of cooperation? That's a deliberately controversial suggestion, but would love to hear your take on this.
Yeah, I really like this suggestion. The problem is that I basically don't have enough data to reach any kind of decision on that or any kind of conclusion on that, which I can back with robust data. And I tend not to do that if I can't really provide the evidence. But what I can comment definitely on is that a couple of years, and it's an anecdotal evidence a little bit. A couple of years ago, Chinese reached out to various scholars, including me, and we had a couple of sessions where we are exchanging views on various things. And one of them was the future of Czech-China relations. And my take was, well, we will have an election, so we will see how the elections will turn out. And then I did see the fear on the face of my colleagues from China, and because they didn't count with the possibility that politics can actually change. And that was the moment when I realized, oh, there is a lot of analytical problems on your side, guys, because if you really count that Miloš Zeman, the Czech president, is going to stay, if you really count that Viktor Orbán is going to stay for indefinite period of time, then basically your analysis isn't going to be good. So, but what I did have seen from that moment, or from various other moments, was that they started to reach out to basically all political parties. It used to be in previous times. Here I'm talking about year 2010 and around that. It used to be that they reached out instinctively to communist parties in post-socialist or post-communist countries. And they also tended to reach out to social democratic parties, which they saw as some kind of communist party revived and rebranded. Let's put it this way, whether it's correct or incorrect, I leave up to you. But since that moment, basically since 2010 onwards, they started to reach out to various parties, including the right extremist parties, minuscule parties which will probably not make it to the government anyway, even to the parliament anyway. And that's overall, overall all society approach regarding political parties. And that's quite an interesting way how, if we can deduce something from that, is that definitely they're on the learning curve. They're learning how the societies function, how political systems function in Central and Eastern Europe. And they didn't want to put everything into one single basket, to rely on political parties, which will probably be in the government, but basically rely on all the fronts or all the friends they can have. So it would be great to have actually more data on this. It would be a great project. I would encourage anyone to to do that, to share the data, but unfortunately I cannot comment more on that.
Perfect, thank you so much. So already avenues of future research are emerging. And as a last question of the event, I would read the next one, which says that 4 or 5 years ago, the sharp power concept was coined and described Chinese malign influence in countries around the world, including in CE countries. Given the shifting attitudes towards China, which have been discussed today, how useful do you think this terminology is and will continue to be? Is sharp power even a useful concept to begin with?
If I may, I mean, I like the concept. I think China is using sharp power precisely now towards Australia, Germany, Sweden, and probably other countries too. But the main channel through which China exercises this panel, it's economic interdependency. And so we have Ericsson lobbying in Swedish government not to ban Huawei from Sweden because it cares for its operations and investments in China. We have German automakers, which basically, okay, they kind of appear to run the German foreign policy, but maybe they don't. But anyways, the Chinese ambassador remarks on, treating German automakers similarly to the way Huawei is treated in Germany sparked so much debate in Germany that I think affected their political choices. And the main thing, I like the concept. I think it's working. I think it's expanding. I think China is weaponizing interdependence. And that being said, our V4's interdependence with China is basically minuscule. We might be the least interdependent countries in the world when it comes to China. Our exports is minimal. We have huge deficits. If the trade was to be halted, China will be the main victim of it. And same goes with investments. I mean, we do not have much investments in China, and China does not have much investments in here. I mean, they used to have some in Czech Republic. But anyways, yeah, you may talk about malign influence, but I don't think it's the way it works. If China is present in any of the V4 countries, it's by a decision of local elites or parts of local elites to let China in, and China will be out as soon as they decide to push China out. Of course, on a given level of interdependence, it won't be as easy to push China out. So it's a risky game, but still, sharp power here in the region is not working. What work? Just because of structural reasons.
Can I continue on that? I totally agree with Jakub that this was never a good kind of theory to understand what's going on here. But I would actually disagree that it would be, well, I don't like the concept, right? As Jakub said that he likes it. And my problem is, I totally agree that what China is doing with Australia, Sweden, and other kind of wolf warrior, right? It's another label. This would really fit in what the sharp power would suggest. My problem with the sharp power is that it creates, it's a very politically and morally loaded concept. it's not, it was never meant to be kind of neutral and objective concept. It was very political. And I think what we risk by using this concept is, and if you read the reports which coined the concept, you kind of get the sense that they say that the West does soft power, China does sharp power. And I think this is, this is just analytically, empirically, conceptually, it's just not accurate. It's very far from being accurate. So this is my main problem with that. I totally agree that a lot of actual steps which China is doing, those are very problematic things, right? And so on, they could be there. But then if you really look at there, I think there are some problems which might create more harm than good. And that's why I don't like the concept, if I can take a different position on this one.
Yeah, I think I will try to reconcile you guys because I'm somewhere in the middle between Jakub and Richard on that. And it depends on where I sit. If I look at it from like purely academic point of view, of course, it's not a fully fledged concept. It's floating around. It still has it's quite new. It still has a lot to do basically in terms of development. If I look at it, things as practitioner, as someone who is observing China, working on China for a number of years, I do see the value of the concept because it started to shift the position or attention on what China is actually doing. So we started to shift attention from purely soft power, which is something which was basically not meant to describe what China is doing at all, or what Russia is doing, or other countries are doing, towards, let's say, sharper edges of soft power. So I do see the practical value of floating this concept around, but purely academically, I would have problem with not this being fully defined and fully described how it basically is different from Joseph Nye's soft power.
Thank you so much. Those were really enlightening answers to the last question as well. So as we approach the end of our time, I would very much thank you for our four speakers to be here and for the amazing answers and the insights they gave us. I certainly learned a lot about the issue and relationship between the V4 countries in China and see how complex the issue really is. And I would also thank the audience very much to be here with us and for the amazing questions which you asked. So I would hereby conclude this event and encourage you to register to the newsletter and watch out for the next event of the series, which will come soon, and hopefully also be able to provide interesting answers on a different angle of the relationship between the countries, V4 countries and China.